Hey there, everyone. Today I'd like to discuss what you can expect from an undergraduate philosophy exam. Now, I'm a second year philosophy student, and in this case, I just finished my first of four kind of major essay exams for my Philosophy 330 class, which is classical political philosophy. And in this class so far, we've been discussing Plato's Republic, and I thought it would just be nice to show you what you should be expecting in an undergraduate exam, the kind of ways that you're going to be expected to think, to process through and deliver ideas. I'll be actually reading to you some sections from my essay, talking about the sections in the work that I'm referencing and whatnot, and just go through the idiosyncrasies of this particular exam to act as a sort of microcosm for what philosophy exams are like in general. Now, this exam came after about 5 weeks of class, and we were looking at the first 4 books of Plato's Republic. Now, this is just one of several exams that we'll be having on the subject, so we will be going through the rest of the Republic, but for now, we were focusing on these first 4 books of the Republic, in which Plato basically, or Socrates, Plato, kind of, it's hard to disentangle these two figures from one another. We were basically looking at the creation of the city in speech, this ideal city that Socrates has sort of planned out, talking about some early theories of justice prior to the creation of this city in speech, and then talking about the 3 classes within this city. So the money-making class, or the working class, then the guardian class, or the auxiliary class, and then the rulers, or what is later going to become the philosophers. And with all this, this culminates in the noble lie, one of the most important contributions that Plato makes in the Republic. And we had been given, before the exam, about a week before, we had been given, I think, 5 different prompts. And our professor was going to choose amongst these prompts to come up with our exam. And what we have is 2 parts to the exam. And the whole thing is essay-based. And the first part, we basically choose one of 2 prompts that we had already been given, and we respond to one of them. And then the second part we've never seen before, and we're given it. And this is very typical in a philosophy exam. Oftentimes you will not be getting stuff ahead of time. You're expected to read the readings, to, when you have questions, bring them up in class. Do not sit back and just not think to express something, because you'll find that it'll actually burgeon into, 1, a very interesting discussion, and 2, multiple other people will probably be having the same questions as you. So bringing them up in class, there's very little studying to be done in philosophy. You read, you read, you read, you read, you read, you go to class for a very small amount of time, and if you don't understand something, you can either talk about it amongst your peers in class or out of class, or you can go to your professor's office hours. Other than that, it's basically reading, short class time, the essays, you get the grade you get. And this can, of course, be frustrating or anxiety-inducing if you're coming from an environment where you're given a lot of very specific material on how to study for your exams. Philosophy is not really like that. It's about learning how to articulate your points properly in a concise format, in something that is virtually off the cuff, which is the reason that you're often not given these prompts very ahead of time. You're given kind of, some expectations. You are expected to know things about what Plato has to say about the good, or virtue, or truth, or classes, or monism, or the forms, or, you were expected to know these kind of things, and you'll kind of figure out what they are as you go through your readings. This is not that hard of a thing to do. But it's very important that as you're working through these readings, 1, you take ample notes in your text. If you look at any page of my text, you will see that it has been annotated fairly decently. This is a school copy, so I'm just using pencil, but I'm giving myself ample notes such that I can remember stuff for class, and also so that I can remember stuff for the exams. Because in this case, the exam is open book. And you'll understand why once we get into the prompt. Because when we look at the prompts, I've got it on the screen here just so that you can actually see what I'm looking at. And I've marked out the professor's name just for privacy reasons. You could probably figure it out if you really wanted to. But this is solely for your instructional purposes, and fret not, these prompts will change every semester, so you are not copying in any way by looking at this. But as you can see, it asks us to compare and contrast different sections of Stephanus numbers. So in Plato's Republic, they are all paginated in a standard pagination system, which is the Stephanus numbers, and these are going to make it where if I say Stephanus number 352b, that is going to be the same lines in all translations, in all editions, so that you might have different page numbers in these different editions, but you'll have the same Stephanus numbers so that you can reference them easily. And in Aristotle, it's different pagination system, but the same kind of concept applies. So in this case, we are asked to compare and contrast between different sets of Stephanus numbers, and then we are going to just write about it. There's not a lot of strict formal requirements that's going to be put here. It's expected that you understand, okay, how much work do I need to put into my argument to compare and contrast these? And in this particular case, I'll read you some of these passages so that you can kind of walk through the same kind of process that I was. But in terms of thinking about what kind of things are you going to be expected to do to bring all these together? Because in this case, you are basically walking through the understanding of justice that occurs in Plato's Republic. And there's kind of three different stages that are reached regarding Thrasymachus and Adeimantus and Glaucon and Socrates, kind of going back and forth and talking about what is justice. And this develops throughout. The Republic basically just starts talking about some theories of justice, and then Socrates goes, okay, this is way too confusing. What we're going to do is we're going to create this analogy of this perfect city in speech, and by doing this, we will gain a larger model by which to look at the little intricacies of justice kind of blown up and magnified. And if justice in the city is the same as justice for the individual person, because justice is supposedly universal, it's referencing a form of justice as such, the unpredicated pure category of justice, then looking at justice in the city is going to give us justice in the case of the individual soul. So it's going to tell us what justice is. It's always also going to tell us what truth is and goodness is and virtue and all these other things. So it's all tied up into a system. And my job as someone who is writing an essay on this is to bring all these points together, talk about the ways that they contrast with one another, the ways that they build off one another in terms of the argument. So let's look at some of the different parts of the Republic to see the sort of references that my professor wanted us to look at in building our argument. Okay, so this first part is Glaucon speaking to Socrates about what justice is, and he has picked up the argument from Thrasymachus, who said that, and I've done a lecture on this if you're curious about going into this in more detail, but justice is basically the advantage of the stronger. And Glaucon builds off of that to give really a very modern Hobbesian kind of argument for a social contract, that justice is about a desire to get better, and an understanding of this is going to help us build a just city. And Glaucon says, they say that doing injustice is naturally good and suffering injustice bad, but that the bad in suffering injustice far exceeds the good in doing it. So that when they do injustice to one another and suffer it and taste of both, it seems profitable to those who are not able to escape the one and choose the other, to set down a compact amongst themselves, neither to do injustice nor to suffer it. And from there they began to set down their own laws and compacts, and to name what the law commands lawful and just. And this then is the genesis and being of justice. It is a mean between what is best, doing injustice without paying the penalty, and what is worst, suffering injustice without being able to avenge oneself. The just is in the middle between these two, cared for not because it is good, but because it is honored due to a want of vigor in doing injustice. So this is very interesting, that justice is basically a byproduct of laws which are made to certain people's advantage. And this is something that, of course, Socrates doesn't like because it strikes him as relativistic, which of course it is. Justice, morality being relative to the power which creates a legal, social, cultural discourse within which we understand the notion of justice. So this first part in our compare and contrast argument is going to be referring to the social contract. And you can see on my paper where I've been given the prompt, I'm writing down this stuff in the exam. Okay, what are some short things that I can use to kind of summarize what's going on here that for my brain is going to reveal everything it needs to. And for me, just the phrase social contract is enough such that I'm going to understand, okay, this is meaning that laws and justice is contingent upon an authority which sets down laws to his advantage and calls what is contrary to that advantage unjust so that people will not want to accost that ruler. Now, for the second part of our compare and contrast, we have a later section from Adeimantus's mouth. And Adeimantus brings back to mind Thrasymachus's argument. He says, Thrasymachus, that the just is someone else's good. He's restating Thrasymachus here. The advantage of the stronger, while the unjust is one's own advantage and profitable, but disadvantageous to the weaker. And he asks, okay, so we're agreeing that justice is among the greatest goods. And he asks, well, of what profit is justice in itself to the man who possesses it? And what harm does injustice do? Because throughout, they've kind of understood that, okay, we can talk about justice and injustice in the abstract, but what are the actual benefits given to the person who is just? And a lot of the argumenters, such as Thrasymachus, state, well, in fact, the unjust man tends to profit. These tend to be the rulers who are good at taking advantage of other people, whereas the just are the ones who typically are trampled upon. And Adeimantus basically seconds this, saying, leave wages and reputations to others to praise. I can endure other men's praising justice and blaming injustice in this way, extolling and abusing them in terms of reputation and wages. But from you, I couldn't, unless you were to order me to, because you have spent your whole life considering nothing other than this. So don't only show us by the argument that justice is stronger than injustice, but show what each in itself does to the man who has it, whether it is noticed by gods and human beings or not, that makes the one good and the other bad. And Adeimantus goes on from this to state that, in fact, what one must really do is merely give the appearance of being a just ruler, because going along with that, you will then be respected, you will be given the acquiescence of other people of, okay, I will follow your laws because they seem just, they seem to be caring about my interest. But Adeimantus states that this must only appear to be in the common people's interest in order for them to acquiesce to this authority. So we have this notion of authority tied up with the spectacle of that authority, which is a very interesting argument and very prevalent still today. Now, Socrates is not having any of this, and he goes on a very, very long argument in which he creates the Citian speech, which consists of three hierarchically distinguished and separated classes who go through an education process of gymnastic and music, particularly for the guardian class, but for all to determine whether or not they're fit to be in the guardian class, in order to have the lowest class, which is the wage laborers or the money-making class. They are going to be producing goods to help the city flourish. The guardian class is going to be defending the city from outward assailments, and then the ruling class is going to be ruling. They are going to be the most philosophic and intelligent and resourceful and strong of the guardians, and they will go into the ruling class. And all of this goes to show for Socrates that what is just, because supposedly this city in speech is just, is the minding of one's own business and not being a busybody. This is what Socrates wants to get to after all of his argumentation is, what is justice? It's staying in your place. That's what justice is for Socrates. And it's important to note that this is going to expand into Socrates' understanding of the soul, where for Socrates, the city is analogous to the tripartite soul, in which you have three parts working in harmony to maintain a unitary soul, which is going to be orderly, which is going to maintain itself against change and challenge. So in the same way, for Socrates, the notion of the just city is about the one that, as he says, most resembles a single person. So for him, this is not going to be a pluralistic society. This is going to be a hegemonic society of obeying what is one's natural station, because these class divisions are supposed to be made according to people's nature. If one is fit to be a guardian, they will be a guardian. If they're fit to be a ruler, they'll be a ruler. If they're fit to be a wage laborer, they will be a wage laborer. And this is supposed to be determined through an education process, which initially does not have any distinctions between class. You are educated, your merits are determined, and then this determines what class you will then be placed into for the rest of your life, because supposedly this correlates with your inner essence, which you have been given by nature. And this is the sort of stamp of natural law upon you. So Plato says, okay, or Socrates once again, that, well, if you want the just city, the just are going to be those who, like in the case of the rulers, the just rulers care about what is true. What is the true best form for society? And this is going to mean understanding what people are truly good at, what people are truly in their essence, as given by nature and by natural law. So as a result, Socrates gets to this conception of justice, that justice is the minding of one's own business and not being a busybody, which is to say not erring from your natural station, doing what you're supposed to do. He says, in my opinion, after having considered moderation, courage, and prudence, this is what's left over in the city. It provided the power by which all these others came into being, and once having come into being, it provides them with preservation as long as it's in the city. And yet we were saying that justice would be what's left over from the three if we found them. And this notion of the three, of moderation, courage, and wisdom, and then the justice is the leftover. I'll talk about that in a moment, because that's going to actually play into the second prompt. But you can see here that we basically have three competing notions of justice going on here. We have justice as a social contract, which is contingent upon the benefit of the stronger. We have justice is being able to give off the appearance of justice in order to maintain one's own strength and benefit. And then the third, which is that justice is this accordance with natural truth in which one maintains their naturally given state and one keeps their place. So these three conceptions come together to give us these notions of justice in the Republic. Now, I actually want to read you my essay that I wrote for this first part, because you may find it interesting. Now, what's going on here is I'm basically going to try to fit all of that knowledge that I just talked about into a concise format that flows together well, that is detailed enough and novel enough that I'm not just regurgitating exactly what I've been taught, but I'm putting it in my own terms in a way that is still faithful to the philosopher. And this is going to entail keeping in mind structure, which is central to any college writing assignment, whether this is a literature class or even writing a scientific paper or indeed writing a philosophy paper. So I open, the question pervading the Republic is, what is justice? To determine what justice is, many arguments are exchanged regarding the inherent value or goodness of justice, as well as whether or not it is beneficial to the just man. Socrates ultimately develops a theory of justice based on the unity and moderated soul, which is the epitome of justice for him. And now I need to list these Stephanus numbers as I'm going through my essay so that the professor knows exactly what I'm talking about. So it sounds a little bit clunky, but there's really no easy way to cite these. For Stephanus numbers 358e through 359c, this is the first social contract session. Socrates and Glaucon, the latter of which has picked up Thrasymachus' position, are discussing what justice is. Glaucon states that justice is a contract created between people sharing common interests. They found the concept of justice on these laws which suitably meet their needs, being sure to castigate those who oppose these laws as unjust. This contract allows those whom the laws are created to maintain to do injustice without having to suffer the negative social consequences, while those subject to the laws will be compelled to act justly, aka in or for the ruler's benefit, whilst also paying most of the price of conforming and obedience. Next section. So that was me summarizing what Socrates had to say about the social contract. It's one paragraph. I'm trying to state everything clearly and in a way that develops and particularly mentions all the necessary caveats that Plato mentions. So going into part B, Stephanus numbers 362d through 367e build off of Glaucon's points whilst also nuancing them as Adeimantus takes up his place. Adeimantus highlights how poets, for example, can preach about moderation and the value of justice, but this does not negate the fact that it is usually the case that injustice is often more to one's benefit than is justice, provided one can maintain the image of being just. As Adeimantus says, one can draw a shadow-like facade around oneself such that a warm countenance can accompany unjust deeds. As such, both Glaucon and Adeimantus are of the opinion that justice does not seem to be valuable, at the very least for the one who acts justly. And again, that is part B. So I was elaborating on this notion of justice as a spectacle, as a facade, as I put it. Now I say that Socrates disagrees with both of these men and develops a lengthy argument which culminates at Stephanus numbers 432b through 433c. Socrates believes that both Glaucon and Adeimantus have failed to talk about justice in and of itself. Socrates agrees that to do so is a challenge, so he creates a city in speech, which may serve, because it's bigger and should allow us a more rationally based viewpoint, to help isolate the essence of truth and justice. Socrates imagines throughout a city divided into three distinct classes, who are as such because it is what they are suited toward in their nature. The working class is the working class insofar as they work and produce, the guardians because they guard, and the rulers because they rule. Socrates therefore envisions that the ideal city will be one in which each maintains his natural place and does as they should, working, guarding, and ruling, respectively. Socrates realizes that just like the city, the individual soul is one which is a unitary and ordered whole, cohering together between its parts, such that justice can be finally isolated and determined as the state of natural order in which one does what one is in essence and maintains their station. Now, I got a 29 out of 30 for that, so not bad. And this whole thing was out of 50. I got a 47.5 out of 50. So that's a 95. So not bad. I've taken classes from this professor before and done a lot worse. So I was proud of that, and hence kind of the reason why I wanted to do this, but also because if my professor thought I got a good grade, then it's good enough to show you guys. So looking at part 2 now, I'm discussing a couple of different things. The first part of the Stephanus numbers is talking about the noble lie and the myth that goes along with this noble lie. And then I'm discussing what purpose does this have to do with the following Stephanus numbers, which is regarding the notion of training in education that Socrates sees as the way by which we discover who are the guardians and who aren't. And then discovering these three virtues of wisdom, courage, and moderation, and figuring out, okay, if I can isolate all these, then Socrates says whatever is left over, that's justice. Now, in the Republic, considering that Socrates is trying to come up with a monistic understanding of the city, a homogeneous, true, essentially perfect political order, he needs to figure out how can he mitigate things that might make this order err, such as desire or frivolity or an unwillingness to do what is just and necessary, even if it risks one's life. And this is, of course, especially necessary for your guardians who are going to be guarding your city. So he says, okay, how are we going to go about teaching to our guardians that they ought to really guard? And also, in particular for the rulers, how do we get the ruler to be just, even though justice tends to, as these other arguers have shown, does not tend to be requited, does not tend to be rewarded very often? And how do you ensure that these rulers who have been given a position of authority aren't going to take advantage of that authority? And well, we have this very interesting argument that Socrates gives, which has been known as the noble lie. He asks, could we somehow contrive one of those lies that come into being in case of need, of which we were just now speaking, some one noble lie to persuade in the best case even the rulers, but if not them, the rest of the city? Glaucon asks, what sort of a thing? Nothing new, I said, but a Phoenician thing, which has already happened in many places before, as the poets assert and have caused others to believe. But one that has not happened in our time, and I don't know if it could. One that requires a great deal of persuasion. So, okay, we're trying to come up with some sort of persuasive lie that is going to act towards conformity. How like a man who's hesitant to speak you are, Glaucon says. You'll think my hesitation quite appropriate, too, I said, when I do speak. Speak, and don't be afraid, Glaucon says. And he says, okay. Let's think about this persuasive myth, basically. This is basically a nationalistic myth that is going to be taught for the purposes of cohesion. And I'll attempt to persuade first the rulers and the soldiers, then the rest of the city, that the rearing and education we gave them were like dreams. They only thought they were undergoing all that was happening to them, while in truth, at the time, they were under the earth within, being fashioned and reared themselves, and their arms and other tools being crafted. When the job has been completely finished, then the earth, which is their mother, sent them up. And now, as though the land they are in were a mother and nurse, they must plan for and defend it if anyone attacks, and they must think of the other citizens as brothers and born of the earth. And from there on, he goes and basically gives a sort of primitive notion of genetics, where these different classes are going to have different metals in their blood. You've got bronze, silver, and gold. And of course, gold is for the rulers, silver for the guardians, and bronze for the working class. And this gold is going to be something which runs by nature through them. It essentially serves as their essence and is going to determine what class they ought to be in. So it's some sort of reflection in nature of this is the true good city. And because everyone has this blood of Mother Earth running through them, they are all brothers and sisters of the earth and should protect the city, since it is basically an emanation of the earth's truthfulness from within. So that is the first part, this noble lie and this myth. And Socrates wants to connect this to an educational system which is going to integrate all of this together in such a way that we can have the rearing of guardians, and when they reach a certain level, they are told this noble lie and the myth that goes along with it in order to ensure conformity and cohesion. Now, for the training that the guardians are going to be given, they are going to be given, and this is a famous part, I've done lectures on this before regarding Plato, of these guardians will get a boy to love. And this loving relationship is not a homosexual relationship, it's a homoerotic relationship. And there is a difference there that's very interesting. But there is going to be no intimacy involved here. It is a way to rear future generations. It is a sort of companionship built around the notion of work and collectively rising up through the strength of the masculine spirit. It is going to entail precise training in gymnastic and simple music. And music in this case is very broad. It's going to be poetry, it's going to be philosophy and critical thinking and things like this. And then gymnastic is going to be the physical exercises that are going to help the rulers be suitable in doing their ruling. And this is going to be something that the guardians are going to be brought up in these communes on their own. They're going to be separate from everyone else, honing their skills, because Socrates says that the best person in a profession is the one who's suited and focused solely on that profession. So he is for specialization. So the guardian only guards, the working class only works, and the ruling class only rules. Now, moving on to these three virtues, this is where the three classes that I've mentioned intersect with the three parts of the soul, this tripartite soul, which is going to be wise, courageous, and moderate. Now, Socrates says that wisdom is, in his opinion, knowledge. He says, "For it's surely not by lack of learning, but by knowledge that men counsel well." So to have a wise society is one ruled by good counsel, which are essentially the ones that know the truth. So once again, for Socrates, this ideal political order is rooted in absolute truth. Now, furthermore, he says that courage is the power that through everything will preserve the opinion about which things are terrible. So this is in relationship to the guardians, he says, are like dogs. And if you have a dog, they are going to love that which they know, and they are going to hate that which they do not know. So in the same case, the guardians will love those that they know, which is their fellow brothers and sisters of the city, and for the rulers, the brothers and sisters of the earth. They're going to love these people like the dog, who is friendly to its family, but to the foes that it doesn't know, it is going to be belligerent. It is going to be bluntly antagonistic. And he thinks that this is essentially what courage is. It is this binary mentality, which I think is terribly problematic for philosophy, but of hating what you do not know and loving what you already know, which quite honestly sums up Socrates fairly well. But then the moderate is going to be the one in which the better rules over the worse. This is going to mean that the better class of the ruler rules over the worse, which is the guardians and the wage laborers. This is also going to be within each individual soul, and this is where we get from these three virtues in relation to the city and to the relation between the classes to the different parts of the soul, moderating the parts that are going to desire and things like this. And this is all going to come together such that we have a moderate, cohesive whole that is able to fight for truth, is able to be philosophic. Like he says that this dog is philosophic because it can tell the difference between friend and foe. And he says that this notion of dialectic and logical differentiation is essentially what philosophy is. So all of this comes together where he says, okay, we've got all these, and whatever's left over, that's what justice is. And when he takes it all away, he figures out, okay, what we already said is what justice is. It is keeping your place. It is doing what one is naturally suited to, because what is left over that is necessary for all of these virtues to work together is that people maintain their place and do what they're supposed to do. Now let's take a look at my essay, just to see the kind of stuff I'm doing here. I write, in order to maintain the ideal city, which is the just city, just as being to do what one is naturally suited to do and not to be a busybody, Socrates delimits a number of means which will be taken to maintain each in their proper place. Now we're moving on to the first of these Stephanus numbers. In Stephanus Numbers 414b7 through c2, Socrates states that if society is to be maintained, there must be told some noble lie, which will serve to unite the city and speech, as is the case for the soul, as a cohesive and moderated whole. This lie will be told to the rulers upon reaching a desirable level of intellectual maturity, such that they will be genuinely motivated to do what is just and be a good ruler. There's my paragraph for explaining what the noble lie is. Now we're moving on to this national myth. Stephanus Numbers 415a through d develops what such a lie will consist of. It is in essence a national myth that all of the city's inhabitants are common stock of Mother Earth, having been gestated for a period of time in ignorance of their true parentage. All other classes are still in their earthbound infancy, while the rulers have emerged in the light of the truth, that all the city's inhabitants have been with the same blood in accordance to their respective classes, gold, silver, and iron/bronze. This blood is a testament to their naturally confined station and confirmed station in one of the three classes, as well as a source of common kinship, which will motivate the rulers to care for the ruled as if they're brethren. So that's the national myth. So far, we've been building up this notion of cohesiveness that I've been talking about in the passages through the noble lie and the myth associated with that. And then I continue. All these that are to become dedicated citizens must go through an education process. Such a process will allow those suitable to become guardians to be trained in gymnastics, simple music, myths to encourage fighting, spiritedness, and a moderated soul which is philosophic and avoids drunkenness and other dull temptations. This regimented education develops in Stephanus Numbers 403d through 404e, and helps to instill in the moderation and the full-fledged men and women of the city a maintenance of their naturally suited role and to work for the maintenance of the city. So this is the training program. I'm saying, what is the point of education for Socrates? How does he see it as an integral part of the city? And now I'm going to be talking about these three virtues and justice's relation to them. All of these instructed ideals and skills are developed for the preservation of a well-ordered city. Socrates explicates how, to maintain their class positions, each must embody certain virtues. At Stephanus Numbers 428b through 434c, Socrates elaborates what these virtues are. First is wisdom, which is to be knowledgeable, good counsel. These people will be led by truth, or at least the pursuit of it. Next is courage, which is the willingness to act on what is true, steadfastly preserving the opinion of what is terrible. On an ethical level, this will apply to all in maintaining proper conduct and motives. Physically, this will be especially pertinent for the guardian, who must orderly and wholly defend against hostile invaders. Considering that this all references an analogy between the city and the individual soul, perhaps this seemed most pertinent of these virtues is moderation, which is the capacity of the stronger parts of the city or soul to rule over and maintain the weaker parts. This is crucial to the maintenance of the orderly and well-kept city and soul. Lastly, Socrates determines that of these three virtues, whatever's left over in the city or soul must be justice. Justice is found to be, therefore, minding one's own business, thus maintaining one's natural position and not being a busybody. All of this coheres together to create the ideal and perfectly unitary conception of the just soul. And I got a decent grade on that. I got an 18.5 out of 20. So that, in essence, is what to expect on a philosophy exam. Now, not all of them are going to be handwritten like this. Not all of them are going to be in this format. You're going to find that they vary a lot. But my hopes is that this has explained the sort of reasoning processes that are expected, the sort of off-the-cuff, quick thinking you're expected to do, the ways you're expected to develop your arguments, and what is going to get you a good grade. And I think it's important that Like, I hate Plato. I do not agree with most of the things he says. But my goal is just to articulate what he is saying well. It's not to agree or disagree. Philosophy education is not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about, can you understand what someone is saying? Can you articulate it? Can you, articulately disagree with it? But that's not really what the professor is about. You'll often notice that your professors will teach something in a way where it sounds like they are wholeheartedly endorsing it. But then if you know them personally, you know that they don't. They're just saying this as if they were the philosopher themselves who had written this that they're now talking about. So I think it's important that you keep a similar approach when entering into your philosophy exams. Treat yourself like you're stepping into the philosopher's mindset and shoes and trying to articulate their points as best as you can. So that being said, I hope that this has been helpful in understanding how to approach philosophy exams. Feel free to check out any of my other content I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other literature. You can become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks if you're available to donate anything to the channel, because books are not cheap, and as a poor college student, I'd appreciate anything you have, but no pressure. Definitely no pressure. That's it for this video, and I will see you in another one.